What if I told you that a black man with blonde hair and blue eyes traveled into the Jim Crow South posing as white to investigate lynchings? What if I told you that he interviewed white supremacists, spoke with witnesses, and gathered evidence that exposed the truth about racial violence in America, knowing that if he was discovered, he would be killed? And what if I told you that this man, Walter White, led the NAACP for 24 years and laid the groundwork for victories like Brown versus Board of Education? Today, we're examining Walter White, the man who investigated America's conscience. Before I show you who Walter White was, the undercover investigations he conducted, and how he used his appearance to expose the truth about lynching, make sure you subscribe and ring the notification bell, because this is the story of courage, strategy, and calculated resistance they rarely teach. Real quick, for this video, I got 3 book recommendations for you on this topic, all written by Walter White. The links in the description and pinned comments. Now, let's dive in. Again, before we dive into Walter White's early life, his undercover work investigating lynchings in the South, and his leadership transforming the NAACP, make sure you're subscribed. This is the history of placing yourself in danger to expose the truth. Before Breaking Bad, there was Walter White. When people hear the name Walter White today, many immediately think of a fictional anti-hero from modern television. But long before that name became widely recognized in popular culture, it belonged to one of the most courageous and strategically brilliant civil rights leaders in American history. Walter White was not just an activist. He was an investigator, a writer, a strategist, a man who placed himself in life-threatening situations to expose the truth about racial violence in America. As a leader of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, he took extraordinary risks by traveling into the Jim Crow South to investigate lynchings. He often passed as a white man to uncover information that would otherwise have remained hidden. His life represents a rare and complex intersection of race, identity, courage, and calculated resistance. At a time when silence and fear allowed racial terror to flourish, Walter White forced America to confront its conscience. Walter Francis White was born on July 1st, 1893 in Atlanta, Georgia, a city that embodied both Black progress and racial tension during the post-Reconstruction era. Although White identified as Black and was deeply rooted in the African American community, his physical appearance challenged rigid racial classifications of the time. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, and very light skin, the result of generations of racial mixing that often included both consensual relationships and the coercive realities of chattel slavery. White himself estimated that he had only a small percentage of African ancestry. However, under the deeply entrenched one-drop rule, which dictated that any person with even a trace of African ancestry was considered Black, he was legally and socially categorized as Black. This classification shaped his life experience and ultimately his mission. Growing up in Atlanta, White was not shielded from the realities of racism. His family belonged to the Black middle class, which valued education, self-sufficiency, and racial pride. Despite these advantages, they lived under constant threat in a segregated society. The defining moment in White's childhood came during the Atlanta race riot of 1906. White mobs, fueled by false accusations and sensationalized media reports, attacked Black neighborhoods, killing dozens and destroying property. Only a teenager at the time witnessed the violence firsthand. His family armed themselves and prepared to defend their home from potential attack. This experience deeply impacted him and planted the seeds for his lifelong commitment to justice and truth. Now, if you're understanding that Walter White was a black man who could pass as white because of the one-drop rule, stay with me, because what comes next shows how he used this to become one of the most dangerous investigators in America. Walter White attended Atlanta University, one of the most prestigious institutions for African American higher education at the time. There, he was exposed to a rigorous academic environment, intellectual currents shaping black leadership, and ideas about civil rights, economic independence, and social equality. During his time at the university, White developed strong analytical and writing skills that would later become essential tools in his investigative work. He also became increasingly aware of the systemic nature of racial injustice and the importance of organized resistance. After graduating, White initially took a job with the Standard Life Insurance Company, one of the largest black-owned businesses in the United States. While this position provided financial stability, it did not satisfy his growing desire to confront racial injustice directly. In 1918, he made a pivotal decision to join the NAACP full-time. This marked the beginning of a career that would place him on the front lines of one of the most dangerous and critical struggles in American history. Perhaps the most remarkable and dangerous aspects of Walter White's career was his work as an undercover investigator of lynchings in the American South. At a time when lynching was both widespread and often publicly justified, few individuals dared to investigate these acts, let alone challenge the narratives surrounding them. White's unique physical appearance allowed him to pass as white, granting him access to spaces and conversations that were completely closed off to most Black Americans. White used this ability with extraordinary courage. He traveled into hostile environments, often shortly after lynchings had occurred, posing as a white journalist or investigator. He interviewed local officials, spoke with witnesses, and sometimes even interacted with individuals involved in the violence. These missions were incredibly risky. If his true identity had been discovered, he would almost certainly have been killed. Now that you've seen how Walter White posed as a white journalist to investigate lynchings in the Jim Crow South, stay with me, because what comes next shows one of his most dangerous investigations. One of White's earliest and most perilous assignments was his investigation of the Elaine Massacre of 1919 in Phillips County, Arkansas, one of the deadliest racial massacres in American history. The violence began when Black sharecroppers attempted to organize for fair wages and better working conditions. White landowners, threatened by the possibility of economic independence among Black laborers, responded with extreme violence. Over the course of several days, hundreds of Black men, women, and children were killed. White entered the region posing as a white man and began gathering information. He uncovered evidence that contradicted the official narrative, which had framed the massacre as a Black uprising. Instead, he revealed that it was a coordinated and brutal suppression of Black economic progress. During his investigation, White came dangerously close to being exposed. In one instance, a white man remarked that his voice sounded like a Negro's, raising suspicion. White narrowly avoided further scrutiny and managed to escape with his life. His reporting brought national attention to the massacre and challenged the widespread misinformation that had surrounded it. In 1931, Walter White became the executive secretary of the NAACP, succeeding James Weldon Johnson. His leadership marked a period of significant growth and increased influence for the organization. White transformed the NAACP into a more aggressive and strategic force in the fight for civil rights. He expanded its membership, strengthen its financial base, and increase its national visibility. One of White's central missions was to secure federal legislation that would make lynching a crime punishable by law. At the time, local authorities often refused to prosecute perpetrators, allowing racial violence to continue unchecked. White worked tirelessly to support the dire anti-lynching bill, which passed in the House of Representatives, but was repeatedly blocked in the Senate by Southern lawmakers using filibusters. Real quick, the books I'm recommending for this topic is linked in the description and pinned comments. They'll give you the full story that's not in American school books. Although these efforts did not succeed during his lifetime, they were far from fruitful. White's advocacy helped shift public opinion and laid the groundwork for future civil rights legislation. His persistence demonstrated a crucial truth. Even unsuccessful campaigns can create the conditions for eventual change. If you're connecting how Walter White's anti-lynching work didn't pass into law, but shifted public opinion, stay with me, because what comes next shows how he built the legal strategy that led to Brown versus the Board of Education. Under White's leadership, the NAACP also strengthened its legal strategy, recognizing the courts as a powerful battleground for civil rights. He supported the development of a legal team that would later challenge segregation in education and public life. This work eventually contributed to the landmark victories such as Brown versus Board of Education. White collaborated with some of the most influential figures of the era, helping to build a network of leaders committed to dismantling systemic racism. Walter White understood that meaningful change required engagement with political power. He cultivated relationships with key figures in the federal government, including President Franklin D. Roosevelt and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt, in particular, became a crucial ally. She used her platform to advocate for civil rights and worked closely with White to bring national attention to issues such as lynching and discrimination. During World War II, White pushed for the inclusion of Black Americans in the military and defense industries, equal treatment, and challenging discriminatory policies that limited opportunities for Black workers and soldiers. His efforts contributed to broader conversations about democracy, equality, and the contradictions of fighting for freedom abroad while denying it at home. In addition to his investigative and organizational work, Walter White was a powerful writer who used literature to expose injustice and influence public opinion. His book, Rope and Faggot, provided a detailed and unflinching examination of lynching in America. Drawing on his first-hand investigations, the book challenged myths and forced readers to confront the reality of racial violence. In his autobiography, A Man Called White, he explored his complex identity and the experiences that shaped his life. The book offered insight into the psychological and emotional dimensions of living between racial categories. His novel, Fire in the Flint, addresses racial injustice through fiction, allowing him to reach audiences in a different way while still conveying powerful truths. Through his writing, White helped educated Americans, especially those in the North, about the realities of life in the segregated South. Walter White's life was deeply shaped by questions of identity. His ability to pass as white provided him with unique opportunities, but it also created internal tensions. He could have chosen to live as a white man, gaining safety and privilege in a racially stratified society. Instead, he chose to identify as Black and dedicated his life to the struggle for equality. This decision did not come without consequences. Some questioned his authenticity, while others misunderstood the strategic nature of his work. White himself acknowledged the emotional toll of navigating two worlds. However, he ultimately viewed his identity as a tool for justice. His ability to cross racial boundaries allowed him to expose truth that might otherwise have remained hidden. Walter White led the NAACP until 1955, guiding the organization through some of the most critical years in the early civil rights movement. He died on March the 21st, 1955, shortly after the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education began to dismantle legal segregation in public schools. Although he is sometimes overshadowed by later figures in the civil rights movement, White's contributions were foundational. He helped build the infrastructure, the strategies, and the public awareness that made later victories possible. His work demonstrated the power of courage, intelligence, and persistence in the face of overwhelming opposition. Walter White's life defies simple categorizing. He was a man who could have chosen personal safety, but instead chose risk. He could have remained silent, but instead he spoke truth to power. Through undercover investigations, national leadership, political advocacy, and compelling writing, he exposed one of the darkest aspects of American history and forced the nation to confront it. His legacy is not only in the policies that were eventually changed, but in the moral clarity he brought to the struggle for justice. Walter White stands as a powerful reminder that real change often requires individuals willing to step into danger, challenge false narratives, and reveal uncomfortable truths. Walter White had blonde hair and blue eyes. He was black under the one-drop rule. He posed as white to investigate lynchings in the Jim Crow South. He interviewed white supremacists, gathered evidence, and escaped with his life. He led the NAACP for 24 years, built the legal strategy that led to Brown versus Board of Education. He died in 1955, shortly after segregation in schools began to fall. That's not just courage. That's calculated resistance. If you want to learn more about Walter White and his work, the books I'm recommending are in the description and pinned comments below. The links right there. Don't miss them. If this video showed you how Walter White used his appearance as a weapon against white supremacy, investigating lynchings, exposing the truth, and building the civil rights infrastructure, I need you to do 4 things right now. First, subscribe and hit the notification bell. This is the story of courage and strategy they rarely teach, and you need to see every video we release. Second, like this video and share it with your family, your church, your community, and your friends. People need to know about Walter White and the risks he took. Third, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. And answer these questions so others can learn. 1. How does knowing that Walter White could have passed for white, but chose to identify as black to fight for civil rights change how you see his story? 2. What does it mean that he placed himself in life-threatening situations to investigate lynchings? 3. How do we teach the next generation about the different forms resistance can take? 4th, explore the sources and books on this topic in our complete Black History Library at the link in the description and the pinned comments below. Walter White posed as white to investigate lynchings. He interviewed white supremacists. He nearly got caught. He exposed the truth. He led the NAACP for 24 years and built a legal strategy that dismantled segregation. Subscribe, share, and speak the truth. I'll see you at the next video.